What? How could this happen? I received the devastating news that my daughter, who was in her final month of pregnancy, had passed away during childbirth. It seemed she had already been brought back home, so my husband and I rushed over immediately. The sight of my daughter lying in the coffin nearly brought me to my knees with grief. But when I looked at her face through the small window of the coffin, something felt off. Without thinking, I reached out to touch her, but my son-in-law hurriedly stopped me. No matter how much I begged to open the lid for a final goodbye, he stubbornly refused. Something isn't right. And when I quietly found a moment to examine her body, as a nurse, I was certain of it. This wasn't an illness or an accident. It was undoubtedly murder. My name is Kathy. I worked as a nurse for 40 years and am now retired, living as a homemaker. My only daughter, Kelly, is also a nurse, and she got married when she was 30. Her husband is Matthew, a senior from her university who is 3 years older than her. When my husband and I were introduced to him, we both felt he was somewhat unreliable. The reason being, when Kelly told us she wanted to marry him, Matthew was working part-time. Despite holding a respectable qualification as a pharmacist, he hadn't pursued that profession after graduating from university. We were opposed to their marriage and set the condition that Matthew would need to find full-time employment and achieve stability before we would give our approval. However, he struggled to find a job, and at Kelly's request, my husband reluctantly arranged for Matthew to join the pharmaceutical company where he was working at the time. Although we expected him to work diligently, Matthew's performance as a sales representative was dismal. According to his boss, he was constantly slacking off, and his reputation with clients was quite poor. As a result, his salary was low, and it seemed that their livelihood relied heavily on Kelly's income as a nurse. When Kelly was 31, we found out she was pregnant. "Don't push yourself too hard," I told her, knowing how much time she spent on her feet at work. She calmly reassured me, saying, "I'll be fine, Lisa is here." Lisa was a friend from her university days and was also acquainted with Matthew. She was a midwife working at a maternity clinic near Kelly's apartment. Since the hospital where Kelly worked didn't have an obstetrics department, she decided to give birth at the clinic where Lisa worked. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and I eagerly anticipated the birth of my first grandchild. However, as the due date approached, I suddenly received a call from my son-in-law. "What? Kelly? How could this happen?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and my mind went blank. He told me that Kelly had passed away during childbirth. "I'm coming over right away." "It's the clinic where Lisa works, right?" But Matthew, stammering, informed me that Kelly had died the day before, and that she had already been brought back home and placed in a coffin. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The words were on the tip of my tongue, but I held them back. Arguing over the phone seemed like a waste of time, so my husband and I rushed to Kelly's apartment. "What on earth happened? Tell me everything." We pressed Matthew for answers. Matthew responded,
"I'm sorry. I couldn't believe Kelly was really gone. I couldn't even bring myself to make the call."
He seemed too distraught to answer properly. Seeing this, Lisa, who had been with Kelly throughout, explained that it was due to massive bleeding. It appeared that she had been by Kelly's side the entire time. And then, I faced my daughter for a sorrowful final meeting. My husband, standing beside me, couldn't hold back his tears as he sobbed at the sight of Kelly through the small window of the coffin. As I gently leaned in to look at her, something struck me. Something's not right. I instinctively felt it. Having worked as a nurse for 40 years, I had seen pregnant women lose their lives during childbirth before. I knew that the most common cause was massive bleeding, but there was something about my daughter's face that didn't match what I knew. When I reflexively reached out to touch her, both Matthew and Lisa hurriedly stopped me. "Please, open the coffin lid," Matthew replied.
The funeral home won't allow it.
"But this is our last goodbye with Kelly." I pleaded with Matthew because I wanted to check more thoroughly to be sure, but he immediately refused. "I have to find a way to investigate this." With that thought in mind, I asked Lisa to go to the nearby supermarket to buy some drinks. After she left, I signaled to my husband with my eyes. He seemed to understand immediately and came up with a pretext to take my son-in-law outside. Taking advantage of the moment, I opened the coffin lid and examined my daughter's body. The vague unease I had felt quickly turned into certainty. As I suspected. The realization was so shocking that I felt dizzy and could barely stand. Just as I managed to close the lid, the three of them returned from outside. Overwhelmed by my thoughts, I was suddenly hit with a wave of nausea. "I'm sorry, I need to." I excused myself and rushed out of the room, heading to the parking lot of the apartment building. Not wanting to be seen, I crouched behind something and tried to calm myself when two people approached. They didn't seem to notice I was there and started arguing. "No, that's horrible." From their conversation, I discovered yet another shocking truth. I felt an uncontrollable anger rising within me. When I returned to the room a while later, it seemed that Matthew had just finished discussing the arrangements with the funeral director, as they said, "See you tomorrow," and left. Tomorrow? Wondering what that meant, I asked, and my husband informed me that the funeral had been scheduled for the next day. "There's no need to rush. If it's tomorrow, there won't be enough time to notify Kelly's friends and acquaintances." To my surprise, my son-in-law scoffed.
Kathy, you may not know this, but family funerals are the norm these days. We don't need to make it a big deal. Let's just say goodbye with only close family.
But I started to protest, but then even Lisa agreed, saying,
"Kelly's friends are busy and won't be able to attend anyway."
While she herself planned to attend, she dismissed my concerns. Realizing it would be futile to argue further, I decided to hurry home. After all, there were many things I needed to do. When I returned home, I noticed an envelope in the mailbox. It was a letter from Kelly addressed to me, and judging by the postmark, it had likely been sent the day before she went into labor. I quickly opened it, and the letter was filled with Kelly's hopes for the future. It began with,
"I'm writing this because I get too shy to say it face to face."
She started by expressing her gratitude to us. Then, she shared her hopes for the child she was about to have. Knowing it was a girl, Kelly wrote in joyful, flowing handwriting.
"I want to name her Emily."
She had also listed many things she wanted to do for her daughter. The letter ended with,
"I'm sure I'll be relying on you a lot in the coming days, Mom, so thank you in advance."
As my husband and I read the letter over and over again, we couldn't stop the tears from flowing. After we had cried our hearts out, I made up my mind to avenge Kelly. To prepare, I started contacting various people and making the necessary arrangements. I also entrusted my husband with one important task. This marked the beginning of our counterattack. After that, I headed to the maternity clinic to take care of something that was more important than anything else. And then the next day arrived. It was supposed to be the day of the family funeral, but neither my husband nor I left the house. Around noon, Matthew stormed in angrily with his friend Lisa. Matthew yelled,
"What's going on?" When I got to the funeral home, they told me Kelly's funeral had been canceled.
Lisa, standing beside him with a furrowed brow, added,
That's not all. When I went to the clinic, they said the grandmother had taken Kelly's baby. What's going on?
I calmly replied, "Oh, well, it would be unfair to leave Emily alone at the clinic without her mother, don't you think?" Since the baby was ready to be discharged, and there were no issues, I showed my ID and explained the situation. They allowed me to take my granddaughter home.
Emily?
Lisa looked puzzled. It's the baby's name. Isn't it lovely? At that moment, Matthew, enraged, stepped closer to me and shouted,
"Don't just name her whatever you want."
"It wasn't me who named her, it was Kelly. Here, see for yourself." I handed him the letter from Kelly. Matthew's face tightened, and he was at a loss for words. Matthew stammered,
"Well, if that's the case, fine, but about the funeral."
I cut him off, glaring at him. "The funeral home you hired had a bad reputation when I looked into it, so I changed it to someone I know. The only downside is that the funeral will be in a week since they had no earlier openings." "That's okay, right?" I said in one breath. Matthew's eyes narrowed in anger as he glared back at me.
"Don't do things without consulting me first."
He snapped. "Oh. Is there something that would be a problem if the funeral is delayed?" I asked, watching him mutter in frustration, and he fell silent. I said, "Then we'll see you in a week," and ushered them out the door. Reluctantly, they left. A week later, the funeral venue was filled with many people who had come to say goodbye to Kelly. When I reached out to Kelly's friends, they all made time to come and pay their respects. Once everyone was gathered, I stepped forward and stood in front of the microphone. "Thank you all for coming to honor Kelly today. Before the funeral begins, there is something I need to share with you all." As I began to speak, Matthew stood up.
"Wait! I wasn't told about this."
He shouted. But I ignored my son-in-law and continued. "I need to share my daughter's will."
"Will? What will?"
Matthew was surprised, but then quickly flashed a brief, sly smile. I didn't miss that. As the room fell silent, I began to read the will aloud in the presence of the attorney. The will began with words of gratitude to her stepfather, who had loved her dearly. "Yes, my current husband is the one who raised Kelly. My ex-husband was a wealthy man, and when we first married, I, being just a nurse, was often accused of being after his money. In the end, I couldn't get along with his family, so I left, taking Kelly with me. Later, I met my current husband, and we remarried when Kelly was in kindergarten. Though we didn't have any children together, he loved Kelly as if she were his own." Some of the people at the funeral, who hadn't known this, were moved to tears. Matthew interrupted.
"That's irrelevant. Get to the important part. Isn't that what everyone here is interested in?"
Ignoring Matthew's impatience, I continued to read the will. Kelly's biological father passed away when she was in college, and at that time, she inherited a large sum of money. The amount was about $3 million, and Kelly expressed her wish for us to use that money. However, since it came from my ex-husband, it had nothing to do with me, and I had no right to accept it. I advised her, "If you hold on to it, there might be a time when it comes in handy." So, Kelly entrusted the management of the inheritance to a lawyer. Matthew, grinning with delight, said,
Well then, as her husband, I have the right to inherit my wife's assets, don't I?
I smiled and told him. But you see, Kelly eventually decided the amount was too large for her. So she discussed it with the lawyer and donated most of it.
What? So how much is left?
Matthew erupted in outrage at the mention of the donation. When the lawyer announced the remaining amount, Matthew let out a sigh of relief.
$1 million left. Well, I guess that's still fine,
he said with a smirk. But the will states that the inheritance is to be divided into 3 equal parts among Kelly's parents and the child to be born, I announced. Matthew's face turned bright red with anger.
What? You've got to be kidding. Then what was the point of me marrying Kelly?
He shouted. The attendees looked at him with disdain, but Matthew didn't seem to notice. No matter how much you complain, this will is legally binding, and nothing will change, I said, locking eyes with him. His face grew even redder as he stormed toward Kelly's coffin. What are you doing? I cried out.
I won't be satisfied until I give her a piece of my mind,
Matthew shouted as he forcefully opened the coffin lid. But then, he froze as he looked inside. Matthew stammered.
Why?
To his shock, Kelly's body was not in the coffin. As he stood there in disbelief, I thrust a piece of paper at him. Look at this, I demanded.
What?
He replied, bewildered. It was the autopsy report on Kelly's body. Ever since that sorrowful encounter at her apartment, I had been suspicious about her death. And when I opened the coffin and examined her body, my suspicions turned into certainty. This was murder. I consulted a doctor I knew, and after explaining the situation, he too felt something was amiss and introduced me to a forensic pathologist. That pathologist agreed to perform the autopsy. Look closely. It's written right here. Kelly's cause of death wasn't due to illness or an accident. As gasps of shock echoed through the room, I continued. She was killed by a drug. The name of the substance is clearly listed here. And you were the one who administered it, weren't you? I pressed my son-in-law, causing him to step back in fear. In fact, I had changed the funeral arrangements to buy time for the autopsy. I also had the cooperation of an acquaintance at the funeral home. As Matthew stood speechless, holding the autopsy report, Lisa quietly approached him. She whispered something in his ear, and suddenly, Matthew's face lit up with a triumphant grin.
Sure, Kelly may have died from a drug, but so what? Do you have any proof that I was the one who used it?
He sneered confidently. This time, my husband stepped forward and handed him a ledger. It was a record from the pharmaceutical company where Matthew worked, the same company where my husband had worked until his retirement. My husband, with the help of a former colleague, had meticulously compared the records in the ledger with the inventory in the warehouse. They discovered that the exact drug that had taken Kelly's life was missing. And there was only one person who had accessed the warehouse on the day the drug went missing. The company's records show it clearly. The only person who entered the warehouse that day was you, Matthew, I said. Matthew's face turned pale as the realization sank in. But then, Lisa suddenly stepped forward, getting in my face.
That could just be a coincidence. You can't be certain that the drug used on Kelly came from Matthew's company.
Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh. It was a classic case of revealing too much. Oh, so you call him Matthew, do you? I thought you used to address him by his last name, I remarked. Lisa's face tensed up, and she started to panic.
So what if I did? It's just a habit from our university days.
She stammered in defense. Without replying, I took my phone out of my pocket and played an audio recording. The recording captured a conversation between two people, a man and a woman. This is Matthew and Lisa's voices, isn't it? I asked rhetorically, though the answer was clear. In the recording, they were calling each other Matthew and Lisa. I had turned the volume up to the maximum, so the entire conversation echoed throughout the funeral hall. Their argument was recorded in vivid detail. Yes, the two people arguing in the parking lot that day, when I was overcome with nausea, were Matthew and Lisa. Realizing it could serve as evidence, I had quickly activated the voice recorder on my phone and captured their conversation. Although I could have handed this over to the police right away, I hesitated, fearing they might destroy other evidence. Instead, I decided to investigate further on my own. Of course, there was also a part of me that wanted to exact revenge personally. The audio recording clearly captured that they had taken Kelly's life for her inheritance and that Matthew and Lisa were having an affair. Ever since they found out Kelly had inherited a substantial amount during her university years, they had been waiting for an opportunity to get rid of her. Kelly's pregnancy presented that chance. It was Lisa who advised Kelly to give birth at the clinic where she worked. During the chaos of the childbirth, Lisa injected Kelly with the drug that Matthew had provided. And you even tried to take the child's life along with Kelly's, leaving her to suffer, I accused.
Of course. If we didn't, Matthew's share would have been smaller,
Lisa replied, unapologetically.
And then the part-time doctor went and performed an emergency surgery on Kelly, saving the baby. What a pity.
Lisa's nonchalant attitude as she said this made me feel more than just anger. It filled me with sadness. It was heartbreaking to hear such callous words from someone in a profession dedicated to saving lives. Matthew added,
If it weren't for that kid, I would have gotten that money too.
He had even instructed Lisa to remove the baby from the hospital and dispose of her. Matthew's greed left no room for any fatherly love. He was entirely consumed by his obsession with money.
And yet you went and took the baby without our permission.
He shouted. The room was in chaos. Some people looked at them with eyes full of anger, while others couldn't hold back their tears. That's why I took Emily from the clinic, to protect my granddaughter from you too, I said coldly. Matthew lunged at me in a rage, but people around us, including my husband, restrained him and forced him to the ground. The police will be here any moment. It's over, I told him. I had asked the lawyer to call the police at the right moment.
But the child is safe, and Kelly would be happy, right? Please, let me raise her with love from now on.
Matthew suddenly became desperate and started pleading. Don't be ridiculous. People like you deserve to rot in hell. We will never forgive you, I shouted. Soon, the sound of police sirens could be heard in the distance. As they were dragged out of the venue by the arriving officers, they continued to cry and beg, Please, spare us. We don't want to go to jail. After that, Matthew and Lisa ended up behind bars for their crimes. Our lawyer informed us that those who take a life are not entitled to inherit anything, so my son-in-law wouldn't even receive the remaining portion of the inheritance. Matthew was fired from his job, and Lisa had her midwifery license revoked. They have a dark, miserable life ahead of them, crawling in the dirt, but they are no longer our concern, nor do we have time to worry about them. After all, we're busy raising a child again after 30 years. And I must say, it's been incredibly fulfilling and joyful. We've decided to use all of Kelly's inheritance for Emily's future. And we're determined to fulfill all the things Kelly wanted to do for her daughter, as written in her letter. So, how did you find today's story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.